You are listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. I'm Elena Paweta, Executive Communication Coach and TEDx organizer. With each episode, I'll share with you communication tips and ideas from top business leaders to help you excel in your career. Welcome to the next episode of Ideas and Leaders podcast. Today, my guest is Christian Muntean. He's the founder of Vantage Consulting. He is guiding leaders and organizations through transformations towards growth and efficiency. And today we're going to discuss his book, his new book. He's a book author of 3 books, and we're going to speak about his book, Train to Lead, where he speaks about boosting leadership skills and personal growth for leaders. Hi, Christian. Welcome to Ideas and Leaders.
Hi, Elena. Thank you for having me.
So, Christian, can you start by telling us what brought you to this leadership area? How did you become a leadership expert?
Yeah. I came into it kind of from an unusual angle. I was working in international disaster relief and community development work. And the short story is I noticed that you could be working in communities that were relatively secure with really well-funded projects. And if your team wasn't led well, or if the team didn't get along well, or if your community partners had the same issues, it was very, very hard to get anything done or to make it sustainable. On the other hand, if you could be in a conflict zone or in a disaster in a very poorly funded project, but if your team or your partners were led well and the teams got along well, you could get almost anything done. And so I became fascinated with leadership dynamics and team dynamics. And so this was all a long time ago. But I started to academically pursue that more and just started to pay attention to it, read different things myself. And then people started to invite me into scenarios where they wanted input, and I realized I could build a career out of it. So that's how I came into it.
Wow, such an interesting background. And your book, Train to Lead, what do you focus on in this book?
Yeah, so so part of my background also is in athletics and fitness, and for about 12 years, I was a strength and conditioning instructor as a kind of a hobby job. And one day as I was leaving the gym, I was thinking, why is it that you can train an athlete, like we just saw the Olympics, why is it that you can train an athlete to peak out at their highest performance level right before an event? But when we train leaders, we don't train them that way. So if somebody's about to step into an executive role or you're about to bring somebody into a management role, at best, we tend to either just give them a whole fire hose of ideas and just say, good luck, hopefully something here helps. I mean, that's your typical leadership development program. Or we take one idea and we drill into it very, very deeply. And the leader has to figure out, does this even apply to me, or when or where do I apply it? And then what do I do about all the questions I still have? What I wondered was, can I use some of the frameworks that coaches will use to train elite athletes so that they can be at their elite peak performance level? Can we use some of that framework to train leaders so that if a leader's about to step into a role or a position, they're as good as they can be at that time? And that's what I structured the book around. So I use concepts from fitness and training, athletic training, to structure the order of leadership ideas and growth, because not everything fits in at the same time, and just some concepts about how to approach growth. So that's kind of hopefully that makes sense, but that's kind of the nutshell. Is I wanted to make a clear pathway for people who are trying to figure out how to improve in their leadership. That isn't just a whole bunch of ideas that they have to figure out how to put together.
Yes, and totally makes sense, because in leadership training world and in those leadership books, we are given many different tools. But I see that you're putting it in a certain structure and making the whole kind of training process out of it. So I think that it is a great concept. So if we were leaders who are listening to us right now, if they were to start their leadership development, what do you think we can start with to start the process?
Yeah, so I'll use the fitness analogy because that's what I'm using in the book. If somebody wants to become a better athlete or they just want to get in shape themselves,
yeah,
oftentimes we think about you need a gym membership, you need to do these kinds of things, but really the starting point has to do with a couple of different things. One, it has to do with just how you eat, your nutrition, and it has to do with the environment that you're in. So if you begin to eat more healthily, it's easier for you to do everything else that you want to do fitness-wise. And it's very hard to overcome a poor diet or poor sleep. And if you don't have any friends who are fit or are athletic or like to train, it's harder to do that yourself. However, if you build friendships with people or join a group that trains, it becomes easier to do that. So I use this concept as a starting point in leadership as well, that we need to think about what are some of the basic nutritional elements that we need to have, positive messages that we surround ourselves in life, both from people as well as things like monitoring our intake of the news or social media, which is often very negative. How do we make sure that we're bringing in positive and that we're releasing or getting rid of or not consuming toxic ideas or concepts that actually just bring us down? And then also, how do we surround ourselves with people who are positive and will encourage us to go forward? Because it's hard to, and there's a lot of good research around this that I refer to in the book, but it's hard to outperform your peer network, your friends, and the people that are around you, because there's just a tendency to stay in the same place. And so that's the starting point, is looking at what are the influences that I allow into my life through media that I consume or the people that are around me, and how do I optimize those so that I'm best positioned to begin to be more effective.
I really love this concept because very often when we're speaking about leadership, we're speaking about some tools, how to behave, how to speak to others, how to, I don't know, give feedback or whatever other skills we might have.
Yeah.
But you're saying about the environment and you're saying about what we are consuming, because we might work in a toxic environment or with people that we, I don't know, don't like or we have conflicts with. And it is hard, it would be harder to use all those tools in such an environment. So it is good to start with actually, like you said, in nutrition, in fitness, with evaluating our current situation where we are at. So when we do this first homework and we evaluate our situation, like what would be the next step? What can we do to boost our leadership skills?
Yeah, so one of the things, and what I just talked about in terms of evaluating the inputs that we receive, that's not what you would classically consider a leadership skill. But I find that because most of my clients are executives or owners, and when I'm coaching them, oftentimes we have to go back to this very basic place of the messages that they have in their life and how they see themselves, how they see other people, and they see the world around them. The second part of this is also not classically a leadership skill, but I find that it's where most leaders struggle, and that has to do with self-management. And so I use the concept of conditioning in fitness, which is just preparing your body for the stresses of the training that you want to do. And so people that have not been athletic in a long time should spend a few weeks letting their body adjust to what, running or lifting weights or the sport that they're doing, and not jump in full force or they risk injury. But then also, so I use that concept for leadership, that for us to condition ourselves for the stresses of leadership, we really have to practice self-management. And there's an array of areas that I talk about, but This has to do, for example, with things like how do you manage your sense of priorities, and how do you manage where you place your time, and how do you manage your own your own perceptions and your own moods, and just how you relate to other people. Because if you don't have, basically, if you can't lead yourself well or manage yourself well, you will always struggle to lead or manage other people. And some of the biggest challenges that leaders experience have less to do with the people that they're leading or the situations, and it has more to do with their struggles to lead themselves.
Yes, very often we react to certain situations because of ourselves and our beliefs. But do you think it is actually possible to work on this ourselves? Or because very often this self-leadership and self-management area is about therapy or talking to someone or working with a coach. And do you think it is actually possible to work on this element ourselves?
Yes, and I think it's good to have a coach, or if you need it, a therapist or other reasons. I mean, that goes back to my first point, which is to make sure you've surrounded yourself with the kinds of inputs that will help you succeed. And so, I mean, I am a professional coach. I've been doing this for many, many years, but I have coaches. And any good coach that I know, or any good consultant I know, also has at least one or two or three people that are mentors to them, or coaches to them, or advisors to them, because they understand the value of making sure that there's somebody who's outside of them that provides that additional input. That being said, you can train and grow if you don't have access to someone. And so I talk about that. So listening to podcasts like this, where the listeners may not get to know you or your guests personally, although maybe they can, but they may not, but they're just surrounding themselves with the ideas and the concepts that you're putting out there. And so I think it's important to kind of marinate yourself or immerse yourself in these useful ways of thinking, and even just the attitudes of people who are in their own lives and in how they serve others are trying to push to a higher place. I think it's just good to be around that, because it helps lift something up in you. If you're only around, people that are complaining or feel stuck or talk about how stuck they are, or only want to talk about celebrities or other things or the politics, that doesn't build very much.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think you can grow without support, but it's a little bit harder.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I think that actually in every step we need support and we need coaches. Similarly, as you said, for example, I coach TEDx speakers to speak on big events. But when I gave my TED talk, I had two coaches myself to prepare for that, because I need someone else to look at me from the outside and evaluate how am I perceived. And I think especially in the leadership development, it is so important to have someone evaluate and look at our thoughts, our actions, and kind of ask questions like, why did you react to something like this? Because very often we think that, oh, this person is negative, or I don't like this person, but in fact those are our reactions to their behaviors. Right. So when you work with your clients, do you see that many issues that they face, challenges that they face, is based on their perceptions and their behaviors?
Yeah, very much. I think I use a framework that I learned from Marshall Goldsmith, which is I think leaders often begin with struggling with how they see themselves. I think many leaders struggle with really fear, is what it comes down to. And they may appear very powerful, very confident, very in control. But I find as someone who's coached many, many leaders, I find that many of them are very afraid of failing, very afraid of people figuring out that they don't know the answer to everything. afraid of, whatever those things are. Not that everybody is, but it's in there. So that sense of how do I see myself? And then additionally, how do I see other people? How do I tend to see relationships? Do I see people as threats, or do I see people as of value or resources? Or do I see people as something to be used, or do I see people as somebody to grow? How do I view the relationships? And then how do I view the world around me? Do I tend to view it positively, like there's opportunity in the world around me, or do I view it as the world's out to get me, or there's limited resources? And so those three kind of lenses are things that I often work with leaders on, because I find that that's the place that they tend to be the most stuck, is even if they've achieved a very high level professionally, if they're hitting a sticking point in that, it often ties to their sense of perception in one of those areas or in multiple areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We definitely need to understand what are our basic assumptions before start working further. And
I mean, the classic one is, scarcity mindset versus
mm-hmm.
a growth mindset. And that's the one that many leaders struggle with. And so if somebody was brought up, and, you talked about owners earlier, I think before we started the show, but that many of your audience were business owners. Many entrepreneurs, I think it's fairly common that many of them actually come from a background of hardship. And part of their drive or the fire in their belly is they want to build something different than how they grew up or what they experienced. But what they grew up with often had some element of scarcity and lessons around scarcity. And so I've met and worked with clients that were millionaires, but they still lived and constructed their life as if they had, their last dollar, or, whatever, they had nothing left, or it was all about to end. And they weren't really living their life the way it was actually constructed, or what was really in relationship to what their actual experience was. It was more about the constraints that were in their own mind. And because they didn't see things from an abundance perspective, that there is opportunity, that if things don't work, you can start something else, that you can grow more for everyone, and all those concepts. And so they can't experience the freedom of that. There's still that stress of maybe this will all end. And helping them move out of that is not just good for them, but it's good for all of their relationships around them.
Yes, absolutely. As entrepreneurs, they often have those blocks with scarcity mindset, like to, for example, raise prices or to start hiring people or hire more people. And I think that this is definitely a very important concept to understand. And Christian, so you're working with many leaders. What would you say are the typical challenges that leaders face, modern leaders face, and how we can overcome them?
Well, I mean, some of what we've been touching on is what I see the most. I mean, you always have things that are specific to someone's industry or the specific to their space. Many of my clients are trying to grow, or they're looking at leadership transition and exit or secession of some kind. So you have questions around how do you navigate that, like you mentioned, growth or adding employees or so on. But the challenges around those things, like how do you actually tactically add your team or build a management team or build structure, that's actually not that complicated. The challenge always comes back to, or frequently comes back to, does that leader believe they can handle more complexity? Do they believe they can handle the fear of, if I bring in more people, there's going to be more conflict, or the sense of, am I going to be able to afford all of these people? It always comes back to, or at least frequently comes back to, these issues of this: how do I see things? Do I believe I have the ability to do this? Do I believe I can trust other people to do their job and to do things well? And do I believe that there's good things in the world and that I can bring a team of people into that? It's not the only thing you need to know about leadership, but I find that when leaders don't have that understanding, they get stuck in this kind of a self-sabotaging circle. Even if it's at a very high level, they'll keep kind of undermining the potential for more success or to create more opportunities for others because of these limiting mindsets. It pops up in interesting ways, but I think that's the biggest thing. I would say, doesn't matter why people hire me, probably at least 70 to 80% of my time, regardless of why they hired me, ends up dealing with some kind of issue related to more of this internal perspective element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that it is so true. Even as you were speaking, I'm thinking about my own business issues, and I'm thinking that, yeah, so many of the things that I'm struggling with, like, for example, writing a next book that we discussed before the recording,
Yeah.
is something that I need to just work with in my mind. And very often we see challenges and we don't do anything about them because of some limitations or beliefs. So absolutely, it is so important. So yeah, thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fun.
So
And,
Christian,
a lot of my work in that space came from recognizing that I needed this stuff. And that's kind of where I discovered it, is just trying to push into it.
yeah, yeah. So to finish our conversation today, what would you recommend to leaders who are listening to us to start doing or stop doing? What are your top tips?
Yeah, I would say, as a broad tip, kind of based off of our conversation, I think that if you want to start making a significant shift in your life, make sure that you have 3 to 5 good relationships in your life who are people that are at whatever you consider to be the next level for yourself. And I mean this in every way. So they're doing in business, they're accomplishing the next level from you, not 10 levels away, because we can't identify with that, but the next level away. And then they also have that same, or in that network, you should also have people who, I think holistically, because we lead out of who we are as people. And so we have to think about our whole person. So I think also someone who has a marriage that's similar to what you would like, or has a relationship with their family that's similar to what you would like, manages their money a little bit better than what you would like, manages their personal health a little bit better than where you're at. Surround yourself with at least a handful of those people. Nobody's going to have everything. Nobody's going to be perfect, but surround yourself with those influences and begin talking to them about some of these things. And then additionally, read books, listen to podcasts like yours, but surround yourself with people that are also pushing to get to that next place. I think that immersing yourself in that kind of messaging and relationships, the research shows it will just naturally start to lift you up. And so that's probably one of the easiest things that you can do, is just make sure that your inputs are positive.
Perfect. That's great advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So if our listeners want to reach out to you to find out more information about your programs, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my website, www.christianmuntean.com. And if you go there, you'll have access to, you can sign up for a weekly article, lots of free resources. I have a blog there that there's, 500 articles on, so they can read through that and find all kinds of content on leadership. So that's a great place to start. And you have contact there if you want to reach me directly.
Perfect. So we'll put the link in the show notes under the episode, so that our listeners can immediately jump there and check it out after listening to us. Thank you so much, Christian, for being on Ideas and Leaders
thank you, Elena.
podcast. It was such an interesting conversation. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. Did you enjoy this episode? Let me know that you listened by tagging me in your LinkedIn profile and using a hashtag Ideas and Leaders. See you in the next episode.